Hi, welcome back for another Tool Time Tuesday. I'm Melissa Muir. This is project number 5 in the Revere series, Professional Jewelry Making. So as you guys might remember, in this book, I am actually walking through the steps of the book and the project. Keep in mind, I'm not a master, so it is something that I am also learning as I go along with you guys. I do try to point out different hints and tips, but for the most part, we are sticking pretty close to how it is done in the book. I know there's a lot of different ways to accomplish the same tasks, but the whole purpose of this book and working through the projects in the book is to learn the traditional jewelry or metalsmithing ways from kind of European, it's a European method, and this is what is handed out by Revere in this book. And so our purpose is to learn this method. Once you have these methods learned, then by all means, take off, make them your own, and start doing what works for you. But it is important to at least learn these skills to begin with. Now in this project we are going to be working with copper and silver wire. Both are 1.5 millimeters, which is approximately 14 gauge. So if you've got some of that hanging around, that's what we will be using. Now when you are dealing with copper and silver, you have to keep in mind, well, especially sterling silver, one is a pure metal, one is not. One is an alloy, and that sterling silver has copper into it to make it a little stronger. But with copper being a pure metal, copper will anneal and be much softer than the sterling. And when you try to twist these wires together, it's not going to work really well, because what's going to happen is that copper is just going to wrap around the silver because the silver is so much more stiff. So we need to anneal both wires. However, we are only going to about halfway anneal the copper. And I'll kind of show you what I'm looking for as far as temperature wise goes, or at least the visual cue of that. And we'll kind of go from there. So let's check it out. So here I've got my wires, and you can see that I've got 4 of them, and that's because if I goof up on one, then I have a backup. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to try to make these wires as straight as possible. And right now, these are all fairly stiff. None of them have been annealed, so it's going to take just a little bit of pressure to kind of get these straightened out how I want them. Let's see, that one has just a little bit more. I'm pretty good with this. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to anneal these, and I'm going to leave them on my block so that hopefully you guys can kind of see the color changes that happen to it a little easier than if I were to do it in the pumice, which is how I would normally do this here in my studio. So in this case, I'm just going to be using a butane head torch, and I'm going to anneal this. So first thing I'm going to do is just gently sweep along my silver wires. So I want to see this oxidation level coming up, and then you see how when I go over it, it almost looks like the metal is clean. That tells me that I am at the proper annealing temperature. So I'm going to move that one out of my way, and I'm going to do it here. So see how I kind of come off, I let that oxidation level come up, and then I go back over it? That's what I want to see right there. So I'm happy with how my silver wires went. I'm going to quench these and just kind of set those out of my way. Now I'm going to do something similar with my copper wire. However, I'm not going to go that full way to the annealing. And so what I'm again going to watch for is for that oxidation to kind of show up on the surface. And then I'm going to just kind of stop because I don't want to take it further. So I'm starting to see a lot of colors right here, and that's a good thing. So I'm just going to go over this one more time, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to repeat that here for the second wire. Again, just kind of heat it up, allow that oxidation to kind of show up. And I'm now starting to see that color come through. One last little touch, and I'm pretty good there. So I've not gone completely to that black stage, which I normally do when I'm annealing my copper. Again, I'm going to quench this. Now here's where your test is. What you can do is you can actually try to bend your copper or your silver a little bit, and you want them to be at about, ooh, that one warms back up. And you want them to be about that same tension, and those actually feel pretty good to each other. So I think we are good to go with my copper and my silver. I'm going to pickle these and we'll move on to the next step. Both pieces are now annealed. Now, I don't believe I told you guys, but I actually start with two 80mm pieces, and that's what we want to have here. We are going to be making a size 7 ring, and we are making this obviously a bit longer because we are going to be cutting things down. So we start off with two 80mm pieces, and what I'm going to do on both of these pieces is create a little bend at the 10mm mark. So I'll just mark that there, the other one, and again mark that there. And we are going to create a little L. So I'm just going to take this and bend this over right there at that mark. So now we have these two like that. What we are going to do is we are going to be crossing these over each other like so. And now we are going to hold this into our vise. So I'm going to get these wires crossed over each other, and in my case I'm using a hand vise or the vise grips. And then I'm going to do the same thing into my vise here. You want to make sure that you're not back too far, but you definitely need to have a good grip on both of these wires. So we're going to make this really tight. You also want to make sure, give a nice good tug here so that you can ensure that it's good. And what we are going to be doing is we have 61mm that we need to have our twist in. So I'm going to just pull really nice and tight, and we are going to begin to twist. And what I want to have is 5 peaks of silver in that 61mm of space. So it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like we are pretty much there. So what I'm going to have is I'm going to take half of this peak and half of this peak so that the silver kind of lines up with each other. Now this peak right here and the peak right here are kind of on their side, but when I go to form this around my ring, it should lay out just nicely. Once you've removed it, go ahead and anneal this, and that's going to help you to get this around your ring mandrel. Now you can use a nylon mallet, you can use a dead blow mallet, whatever you want to do, but you want to get it to about that size 5, 5.5 mark, and that's where we're going to then make sure everything lays out right, and then we'll mark it for cutting. Now taking a look at this, this is perfect. So we're at about the 5.5 mark, and you can see that my silver and my copper weaves, or the wraps, kind of follow each other, and that's exactly what we want to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Sharpie here, and we are going to mark these points here on that silver. I want the silver to remain on the top. So I want to make certain that I am cutting the silver here on the top. So we're just going to mark that with a Sharpie where we want to cut this. Like so. And if you want, you can also mark down at the bottom on the copper, however you'd like to do that. But now we at least have our reference points. Now remember, we're after a size 7 ring, but because of this weave that we've done and the loose wrap, it is actually going to stretch beautifully, and the materials stretch really well, both the copper and the silver. So it'll be very easy for us to get this down to a size 7. For now though, let's get this cut. So what I've done here is I have created a little groove that I can rest my ring into while I come in to cut this. I want to make sure that my rings or my blade is lubricated, and I'm just going to cut along that line that I created earlier. It can get a little bit fiddly here on wires, so just take your time. All right, and then I want to do the same for that bottom copper wire. And I may need to touch these up with a file in just a little bit. So I'm going to flip this ring over, and I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. And we want to make sure everything lines up nicely. And it looks like we've actually got a really good fit here. Kind of excited about that. So we want to just use our bench pin, make sure everything is stabilized. We're going to use our file to, and right now I'm just kind of working on that copper wire there at the bottom, and then we will begin to work on the silver wire on the top. Put this over, do the same thing here. Now another thing that I'm going to do is I need to separate these wires. And so I have a bench knife, and just ever so gently I'm going to work my way in between the silver and the copper, and I'm going to separate those or kind of open those up. Hopefully you guys can see that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So by doing this, my goal is to bring these copper pieces together. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to use some of that spring back motion that happens with our wire. So I'm just going to kind of twist beyond and come back, and I want to make sure that I've got a nice seam and a nice fit here between these two wires. I think we are actually looking really good right here. Next thing we need to do is solder this little join close. Again, we want these silver wires kind of out of our way a little bit, and then we will solder those close together. So the next thing I need to do is apply just a little bit of flux right here to my piece. And again, I don't want to put too much on here because it is copper, and so we don't want that solder to spread everywhere. So we want to see if we can just get right here into the seam. And I'm going to take a small piece of solder, and we're going to place it just right there on top of that seam. Like so. Now what's going to happen is we're going to come in here with the torch just underneath this. We don't want to hit that top. We want to be very, very careful about those silver ends right there. So I want to just gently warm this, and I want to be very, very careful about those silver ends because they will ball up and melt, and we definitely don't want that. So we're just going to gently warm that till we see the solder go. and there it went. So I'm pretty happy with the seam. So the next thing we need to do is put this into the quench and pickle this, and we will be ready to come back for the silver section. Take the time if you need to clean up any extra solder that you might have had there with the copper. And then you also want to get the silver ring closed. Notice that there is still a little bit of a gap here. See if I can get that to show you guys. So there is a bit of a gap right there between the silver and the copper, and that's great. That's exactly what I wanted. If yours isn't quite that prominent, not a big deal. But anyway, so I did exaggerate mine just a little bit so I could show you on the video that's okay to have that little bit of a gap. So the next thing that I want to do is, again, add a little bit of flux to this. And again, I just really need to get into that seam is all. Then we are going to add our piece of solder. And once again, it does not take much, so we don't need a very big piece. Just lay that right there on the top. Get my torch going. All right, so once you have your solder on there, we're going to get our torch going once again. One more time, I'm going to come in and ever so gently just warm things up. I don't want to hit that solder directly. I want to make sure everything is nice and warm. And there we saw the solder flow. Looks like we've got a good seam and we are good. Once I have this done, again, I'm going to quench, and we will take this over to the pickle, and it will be time to do the final shaping and sizing of our ring. At this point we have our ring, and now it is time to get it to the proper size. So I'm going to slip this onto my ring mandrel, and again we are here at about a 5.5 mark is where we're at. And what I would like to do is make this to more of a size 7. So I'm going to use my nylon mallet, and we are going to kind of compress these wires. And now we're at about a 6.5, and you can see it's not taking a whole lot of pressure to get this where we want it to be. Now you might see that I have a little bit of a polish on my piece. All I did was take a brass brush to it, and before doing the sizing part of it, I also took my file and cleaned up any areas that might have had kind of weird solder bumps or anything like that. Now, I'm doing this with a nylon mallet, which is going to allow me to keep my wires round. But if you want more of a dramatic effect, you can actually take a steel hammer on here and you can flatten this out. Now, the goal is to have a size 7 ring, but if I do a size 7, it's not going to fit me. And so I'm actually going to stop right here at 6 3/4, and there is our ring. One thing that's really cool about this ring is that by doing the soldering of your copper underneath the silver, even though we've used silver solder, that silver piece is going to cover that up. So as long as you've done this properly, you'll actually never even see that silver seam, especially when that ring is worn. From here, after you've got your ring formed, definitely do whatever polish it is that you're after. You can add your patina or whatever the case might be. And I hope that helps answer some of the questions that you guys might have. It helps you see how things are put together. And in the sake of honesty, I will tell you right now, this is probably my 4th rendition of the ring, and I'm so glad that it finally worked on camera so that I could show you how things can come together and how they need to work as far as the spacing and everything like that goes. As always, if you guys like the video, be sure to give me a thumbs up, mark subscribe, ring the bell so that you get the notifications whenever I post new videos, and especially as we continue to work through this book. Like I said, you guys, I'm not a master yet. I'm working through this just right along with you. So bear with me as I make my own mistakes and work through bettering my skills as well. I will see you guys next Tuesday. Have a great week.